First of all, hi. I think
Hi,
yeah,
thanks for having
yeah. I
me.
think it's first time we are interacting ever, right?
Yeah.
I'm aware of Zorin because a lot of people in my circle use it, but personally I have
Hmm.
never kind of used it. But I'm very well aware of it. I have tried it a couple of times, but I never used it, kind of in a full capacity. So it's
Hmm.
kind of interesting to talk to you to understand where the distribution is heading and what's your old goal and everything. I did see the latest press release that you announced with the new release of Zorin. So let's
Hmm.
quickly kind of get something about you first, that what do you do, and how you came to kind of first of all get exposed to Linux and open source, and then how you came to found Zorin or create Zorin OS.
Yeah, absolutely. So the story actually started back over 9 years ago. So I was 12 and my brother is 14. My brother is the chief technical officer. So we first came across Linux at around that summer of 2008, and we were really amazed by how much better it was than the proprietary alternative. So it was a lot faster. We saw it was so much more secure. We had so much more control over the desktop than all of the others. But then when we showed it to our dad, who wasn't very technically geeky like we were, we saw the main drawback of Linux, which its lack of user friendliness, to say. Um, at that point in time, actually, a lot of progress has been made to make it very user friendly. But simply the aspect that traditional PC users were just not used to the different layout. They weren't very comfortable with having to relearn a few basic tasks and basic concepts about using the desktop. That we saw was one of the major roadblocks to making Linux popular on the desktop in general for the whole public. So we decided to start developing ZornOS and giving it a really familiar and user-friendly interface so that you have a desktop that resembles Windows. So you have the taskbar, the start menu. You don't really have to learn many new things just to get using it. And so we went from there. We released the first version of ZornOS in July of 2009. So 9 months after we started the project, we got the first version out, and we were really surprised at how much it has grown in the early days as well. We saw that many users just it clicked with them. They were struggling to use Linux, but now it was a lot easier simply because of that final step in making it really familiar. And ever since, we've just been improving it, making it even more user friendly and listening to our users.
It was announced in 2009. That's when officially released Dorinos, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
2009.
was it the same year when your dad, when you exposed him to Linux and you saw that he's having some challenges with Linux? Was it the same year or before that?
Sorry?
Was it the same year when you exposed your dad to Linux and you saw that he's having some issues?
Oh,
Or was it
no,
before that?
that was, yeah, it was back in 2008 when we first showed Linux to our dad,
Right.
and that was when we decided to start developing Zorn OS.
So I think this is once again a great example of how to scratch your own itch kind of project,
Hmm.
because that's what I've seen with a lot of these distributions where people wanted to do something. I mean, Linus started Linux for the very same reason that he could not do a lot of things. So
Hmm.
he and that's how RMS started the whole GNU project. So yeah, that's the typical kind of story there. And now, as you said, it has kind of grown. So beyond your dad, what kind of target audiences you are kind of looking at when you look at Zorin in general?
Yes, so we're basically taking a look at the entire PC user base and just asking questions. Why is, Windows and Mac still the most popular alternative? Why is Linux not being used as much, despite its enormous advantages? And so we've been looking into, everyone from small organizations, schools, users at home, people of all ages, and all the way up to large organizations, and taking a look at how could we scratch their itch, make their computing experience better, make it faster, work better on their hardware, and just making it very user friendly so that the natural choice becomes Linux for them. And we want to make our interface, as simple as possible to make the transition over to it. So, in short, just looking at the entire PC user base and trying to see how we could solve their
Yeah,
problems.
that's actually a very complex problem to first of all identify that, because I was actually, when I was looking at it, and I am actually working on some stories also around why people still use Mac OS or Windows. I mean, to be
Hmm.
honest with you, I am a very, very platform agnostic person. I used to be a pure Linux user, but ever since I moved to US, uh, in a capitalistic world from Europe, I have kind of and the reason is simple that now. I write for almost a dozen of publications, so I don't have that much time that I used to have earlier to fix things sometimes.
Hmm.
So I do want at least one system where I just work. At the same time, I should get access to latest applications or whatever is going on without breaking the system.
Hmm.
I mean, I believe in rolling release distribution. Just like we are organic humans. It doesn't happen as suddenly we will get mustache. The full grown it grows. I mean, our body gradually. So I think software should move in their direction. That's why at the same time I also do a lot of audiovisual production work.
Hmm.
I'm a trained filmmaker. At the same time, I have drones, so I want to able to connect my drone and upgrade the firmware. So I use every platform out there. I don't use Windows much, honestly, because I don't trust, but I use Mac OS heavily, especially when I travel. And the reason is that it works with
Hmm.
the whole ecosystem very well. And So when I look at these users, I that was actually going to be my question. That when you said that Zorin takes aim at Windows and Mac OS with upgraded operating system, how can you really steal users from Apple when those users are like kind of, they use iPad, they use iPhone, they use Apple Watch, and they just love the whole integration where they can get their messages from anywhere. They don't have to be next to their phone to reply to messages or take phone calls or whatever it is.
Hmm.
I do see a possibility of people who are at the fence, who are not totally into Apple ecosystem, and they use PCs just for the sake of PCs. So when you do Windows, could be the same reason. So how do you really plan to steal users from them just based on operating system? Because what I look at is the whole ecosystem matters, applications matter, how it works with hardware matters. So I'm sorry I took too much time, but it's kind of challenging topic itself.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, ecosystems are becoming the new platforms, as you just said there. And I think the best opportunity for the Linux desktop to thrive in such an environment is actually to make it work well with those ecosystems.
Right.
So, integrating really well with Android. So, there have been a bunch of new projects in linking, for example, Android phones to the desktop, M Connect, KDE Connect, and we see ourselves as supporting those projects and um, preloading them inside of Zorin OS in future versions so that you have a seamless experience between all of the technology that you
Mm-hmm.
own. So basically making it work really well with the technology choices that you have, and also making sure that you're not locking yourself completely into a single monolithic ecosystem.
Yeah.
That's the end goal of our desktop
Right,
strategy.
I totally agree with your point, and I do understand that whether whatever RMS says or what you're saying, don't lock. But people really don't care, to be honest with you. If you've seen, people are on Facebook all the time, especially here in
Hmm.
the US, people are willing to trade their addresses, and phone number just to get 1% discount in Walmart or whatever it is. So they don't care about privacy or vendor locking, because that's the world they live in. Since I grew up in India, then I lived in Europe, so I do understand different perspective. But here people don't care. So I don't really understand. I'm not really sure that that kind of pitch works for a majority of users. That you should not get logged into a. They say I don't care. I want to be able to chat with my mom on Facebook. Or actually, I have
Hmm.
talked to a lot of people who are deaf, and they prefer FaceTime, because what FaceTime does is it compresses data so well without affecting the video quality, because they need to lead lips. They
Hmm.
need to, so they interact. When we talk to all a Skype or Hangout is the worst one. And if the visual quality is bad, they cannot read lips, so they cannot understand what the other person is saying. So that's why all of
Hmm.
them, they use iPhone just for FaceTime. So a lot of problems they solve which people don't realize. So they like to live in that ecosystem. What I do see is that there can be some niche or target markets for Linux. Have you ever tried to kind of
Hmm.
identify or cater to those markets instead of going after
Yeah.
general purpose, computers?
Mhm. Yeah, so one of the main target markets that we're actually focusing on starting from this year onward is actually going into enterprises, businesses that are small, large, even governments, schools, that especially are bogged down by the high price of the proprietary software that they're using right now. So one example is the city of Vicenza in Italy. They decided to start moving over to Zorin OS last year because they had a lot of computers that were running Windows XP. They were getting slow, and of course, the support has run out. So it just did not become a viable alternative to continue using those computers. And if they were to stay to Windows and stay in that ecosystem that they were locked into, they would have had to purchase a whole load of new computers, which was just not financially viable for them. So they actually discovered our operating system and saw how simple of a transition it would be to move all of the workstations from Windows over to Zorin OS, and the fact that users would have to have minimal training. They just saw that as a huge advantage, and they get to keep their computers, so they're saving a lot of money. Um, we see an awful lot of organizations that are both small and large that could benefit of from such a circumstance. I mean, there's still, I believe I saw that there are around 15% of all computers who are still running Windows XP, which are in dire need of an operating system upgrade. And as well as that, in 2020, Windows 7 will lose support. So that's nearly 50% of all computers in the world are running Windows 7. They're going to have to make some sort of switch. Um, Switching over to Windows 10 is going to cost them, and perhaps their computer won't be powerful enough for that. So if we were to create a full ecosystem of management tools to help organizations to move over to Zorin OS and even other Linux distributions, that could become very influential in the market. And so that's what we're doing now. We're creating these management tools to make it really simple to switch over.
Right. Now you got my attention, because enterprise, the market that I closely monitor, and that's the only market I care about. I really don't care about the
Hmm.
consumer space, because I think it's moving to VR, and new interfaces are coming in, and more. I mean, PC market
Hmm.
itself is declining in the consumer space. Now, when you talk about, and that was going to be actually my question, because I was talking to Italo, from LibreOffice, the document
Hmm.
foundation, and his point was that most of the times, things fail because people try to move users from one platform, one application set to other, from Microsoft Office to LibreOffice, or from sorry, Windows. Let me get some water. To desktop Linux, and that never works because they have a lot of workload on the older platform. So you have to migrate the workload. You cannot just format the
Hmm.
drive and expect them to. You have to migrate their workflow. So when you talk
Hmm.
about these management tools, the first thing is what kind, because you're working with city of Italy. So number one is what kind of problems or challenges that you have identified after talking to the authorities, or who are people are responsible for this migration, and what solution you have seen in the open source world, and then how you plan to migrate them.
Yeah, so the environment actually in that regard is getting a lot more receptive to change. So you see that there are organizations that are moving over to, for example, Chrome OS and Chromebooks. And when you talk to IT administrators who make that switch, one of the most common um, advantages that they point out with Chrome OS is how easy it is to manage. So you don't have to go around to every computer and make sure that they're running the most up-to-date version of the antivirus software. You don't have to babysit users essentially through routine management tasks. They can actually get those done through a cloud-based console right from their seat. So essentially, we've heard similar complaints from the municipality of Vicenza that essentially some tasks were kind of repetitive and had to be done on all computers, and that was slowing down the transition from Windows to Zorin OS because they have to repeat an awful lot of package installations and updates throughout the year on each computer individually. So essentially, the tool that we're creating is allowing these IT administrators to administrate all of their Zorin OS and Linux-based computers as simple as it is once. So they'll be able to make sure that all of the computers have the latest security updates installed. They'll be able to install new packages, run scripts directly from that console, and be able to control exactly which computers get those changes and which ones stay the same. So essentially, that's one of the main gripes of moving over from Windows over to a Linux-based environment. It's just getting those details right, and that's what we're planning on offering next year.
So, are you working with any other most of these organizations? They don't use the operating system. They use applications on it, to manage files. So, how are you going to tackle the challenges with Microsoft Office or other legacy applications that they were using?
Yeah, so in a recent video that you showed, I saw that you mentioned how the LibreOffice team encouraged people to move over their applications before making the transition to the new operating system, which is exactly what we'll be encouraging to our prospective users. That way they'll be able to figure out exactly what are the pain points that they'll have to teach users, how to use the new system. But also we want to make sure that those customers would be able to revert back to their Windows-based applications if necessary. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're including Wine out of the box in Zorin OS and the most up-to-date version as well. So you actually be able to run lots of Microsoft software, including some of the more recent versions of Office like 2010 and 2013. That would be possible. And on top of that, we're making sure that we're having the latest browsers so that if they want to use cloud-based Office suites like Microsoft Office 365 online, as well as Google Drive, that would be integrated into the desktop as well.
Now, this is something interesting, and a lot of people don't understand. But when you mention Chrome OS and Chromebook, they are like cloud-based, cloud-focused, distributions, and they don't much, believe in, the native application. They do cloud native. They run cloud native applications. A lot of people, I don't know what is your opinion, but people say no, there is no cloud. It's someone else's computer. I think whoever says that doesn't understand what cloud actually is. When you talk about cloud, you're talking about a cluster of computers, who are working together. You are scaling. You have elasticity. You have a lot of networking going on. There is storage going on where you have, not only availability, but cloud is totally different beast than a desktop computer that runs or a center. You can have cloud in your own data center also. Cloud is just a cluster of computers. Yeah. It's just a word which sometimes people don't understand. So as cloud native applications become more and more popular, and more and more organizations are moving to cloud. For example, look at Uber. There's no desktop application for Uber. You have to use what they have is a thin client which runs on your mobile phone or whatever it is. And everything is Netflix. You don't you watch the whole movie, but you don't have any piece which other than the thin client which runs on it. So as these cloud native applications become more popular, the platform that runs on your system will become irrelevant because everything is running in your browser. So that's where I see a huge scope for not only Chromebooks but also Linux-based distributions, which are kind of,
Yeah.
so while a lot of people in the Linux world get, all, upset about cloud, but cloud can actually help them because in reaching to the masses that they will
Mhm.
like enterprise, almost everybody is moving to cloud native application, whether they're running it on AWS or OpenStack cloud or whatever, they are moving to, and they have thin clients which run those application natively. So from it's, government of Italy or city of Italy, how much of their workload is moving to cloud? Are you aware of any such things so that we can see, okay, that may makes things easier in future, so they don't have to rely on Wine or something like that?
Yeah. So their switch over to Zorin OS was actually done at a very opportune time when they were actually making the switch over to cloud applications. So some of the applications that they relied on were Windows based and there were custom ones, but they understood the move to cloud, and they're beginning to offer all of their applications on the cloud. There's still a few applications that are Windows only, and in that case, they have some Windows-based machines which workstations can VNC into essentially. But essentially, that move over to cloud that they're doing is making it a lot easier for them to make the switch over to Linux. And in my opinion, the move over to cloud from native desktop applications, especially in the enterprise space, would only make Linux stronger
Exactly,
in that regard.
exactly, yeah.
It makes it so much easier to make the switch over because when when organizations are moving over, for example, to Chrome OS, which is the current popular trend, those organizations need to make sure that everything works in the cloud in a web browser, and that web browser is also being offered on Linux-based desktops. We include Chromium on Zorin OS by default, so everything that works in Chrome OS works in our operating system, and of course, there are Linux distros as well. And essentially, if we can make Linux a more advantageous choice than Chrome OS, then it could become the leader up beyond Chrome OS. For example, they might have a lot of computers that they would need to replace if they were making the switch to Chrome OS. They'd need to buy Chromebooks for all of their employees. In the case of Linux, they can just keep their existing computers, install Linux, have a desktop that doesn't cost anything to run. It only costs for the management and some software as a service tools to maintain. And that could be even more cost effective than switching over to Chrome OS. And uh, on top of that, the native applications that are on Linux that would be, in some cases, more powerful than cloud applications would be able to provide that added advantage over Chrome
Right.
OS. So that's where we see ourselves competing against um, the other alternatives, the more modern organizations that understand that a cloud application suite is more advantageous and that are a lot more footloose to make the switch over to a new platform.
Okay, I'm a Chromebook user. And one of the biggest advantage of Chromebook, as you are also aware, is you don't have to worry about it's maintenance free. There is no
Mhm.
worrying about. All you need to do is, because they have two operating systems installed. There's a switch. The updates are installed on the the one which is sitting in the background,
Mhm.
and when you reboot, it just switches to the, and it takes like 1 second, and that's it. And there is nothing that can go wrong in a Chrome. I have never ever. I've been using Chrome OS from the CR48 days, and I had never had to kind of repair, or fix my Chromebook.
Mhm.
Never broke. So how do you plan to achieve the same level of maintenance-free, upgrade-free experience from Zorin? Because that's kind of big tall order to. Though on Linux, CoreOS has kind of established, a mechanism where you can do the same, on the Linux as well. So how
Mhm.
do you plan to create that experience for these people? And I'm talking of, once again, enterprise users who are looking at Chromebooks.
Yeah, so one of the ways that we want to do that is through that new management suite that we're developing. We want to make sure that uh, there are lots of different express settings. So if they want to be able to provide their users with the most up-to-date upstream updates, they'll be able to tick a box and make that happen. And if there are any issues, then it will be a simple rollback that they'll be able to make on the package side. But more interesting than that on its own is the move over to containerized applications on Linux. So Snap and Flatpak
I'm sorry, I'm
mainly.
just interrupting you. Do you have somehow do you have a mechanism that you're reading my screen here? Because all the questions that I have written down, you're kind of jumping into those before I even mention them. Whether it's management tool, whether it's Chromebook. So I hope you don't have any kind of spyware installed on my system, right?
No, no, no. It's just, I guess, great minds think alike, we can
Yeah,
say.
I think so. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, so these containerized application frameworks are really exciting. The fact that they'll be able to provide the latest version apps right to the users as they need them, and not having to worry about whether the newest libraries are available and if some breaking changes might happen. They'll be able to provide the newest version of the runtimes. For example, in Flatpak, the newest version of the runtimes would be available straight from the framework, as well as making it work together with all of the other apps. So, say in an environment where both Flatpak and Snap packages live side by side, which is what we are planning on doing in the next version of Zorin OS, we need to make sure that the software store and the application delivery frameworks and mechanisms work really well in both regards, so that users don't really notice the difference between Flatpak, Snap, and traditional apt packages. And in that regard, we just need to make sure that everything is well integrated, in the fact that IT administrators would be able to roll back or roll forward updates as needed. So it's just making sure that we can continually invest in making sure that everything works really well and is really well integrated into the environment. So that might also come in the trade-off of reduced customizability and granular control over some aspects of the system. But in the case of IT administrators who care more about a working environment than something that's super configurable, we think it's a good trade-off to make. And we'd want to be able to support both kinds of environments.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of very pragmatic move because when even from the commercial vendor's point of view, when you look at Linux desktop, you don't see one desktop. You see three different or four different kind of branches out there. You have to support everything, and then they have made it's a big giant mess. That's what I said. I was talking to Carl from System 76, and I was like, what I don't understand is that on my Mac OS or even on Windows, I get LibreOffice the very first day, the very moment it's released. But on my Linux desktop, it takes weeks or even months for the same application to come to the repository. There's no easy way. So I can. And the funny thing is that both your platform and the application is open source. They have been working in open for all these months. So why you did not test it back then? And why you test it after the release? Because the source code is already out there. They have release candidates, and the whole purpose of releasing those release candidates is to test it. So I mean, when both are, so why don't maintainers, no offenses, but I think that maintainers are lazy. So instead of start, testing it beforehand, giving them feedback, fixing things at your end, so that when they release, you have the package ready too. I mean, it's already happening in the enterprise world. Everybody is doing that. So I think, yeah, moving to that, these two, will help, Zorin to kind of, as well as admins, and maybe there will be a possibility that commercial vendors will also see an opportunity when more and more people are using Linux in enterprise. Just the way I was talking to the Microsoft executive who looks after .NET Core and Visual Studio. Now more than 50% Azure machines run on Linux. So it's Linux is kind of taking over Microsoft Cloud. And they have to support the platform. So the new Microsoft doesn't care about Windows. They just care about revenue stream. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Any company does that. So if Linux is more successful in enterprise, through that, more vendors will kind of support their application. There is no reason for them to not support it. So I think that's a very good move on your part to support these two kind of, though competing. I don't know which one will prevail in the end. But I think there is App Image and Flatpak and Snap. Which one do you think has the? I mean, this is just which one do you think has more chances to succeed and get overall adoption as compared to others?
Yeah, looking into the current state of them, certainly Flatpak has, I believe, in my regard, the upper hand in terms of sophistication. So if you take a look at, the app sizes that need to be downloaded, you'll find that if you download, say, for example, the latest version of the GNOME calculator, it would only take up a megabyte or two. And in the case of Snap, it would take up a good bit more, simply because they're not making effective use of runtimes. But personally, I actually think that Snap will end up being the more popular one, because I really like what Canonical are doing in their proactive approach in making sure that app developers adopt this new standard, and also as well as that they're really making a good effort to make sure other distributions make their software compatible with Snap. So I know just a week or two ago, they ran an Ubuntu rally in New
Yeah.
York to help, in part to help distribution maintainers to make the switch over to Snap and support that new packaging platform. We didn't go because we actually already support Snap in our operating system. But I saw, for example, Solus and
Yeah.
Elementary, they were over there and collaborating with Canonical. So the fact that Canonical are making a really big investment in making sure the platform grows, I think that's what will end up making Snap win. Of course, Red Hat might do a similar thing with
Mm-hmm.
Flatpak. So it's really up to the business strategies of the two contenders, you can say.
Right, right. Yeah, that is a totally different word. Because Snap is also in IoT and cloud, so we'll see which
Hmm.
platform will prevail there. Now, before I get into some of the basics of Zorin OS, there one more thing. I'm a science fiction writer, so I love artificial intelligence and VR and AR and all those things. When you
Hmm.
do plan to compete with Chromebook and Chrome OS from an operating system perspective, one big push that is coming from Google is going to be machine learning and artificial intelligence. There will be
Hmm.
Google Home devices in offices which will replace your phones. You just it will integrate your calendar, it will integrate your calls, you'll take all the calls through that, and you don't have to be near your number is moving with you all the time. When you move from one city to other city or whatever. So do you see? I don't know the situation in Europe yet, or in general, what is going on with government agencies. But do you also see that becoming a challenge for Linux? But because I don't see anything anywhere going on in the Linux world. Or let's just change the questions to make it easy. From forward, future looking, where the world will be in 10 years from now, where machine learning and artificial intelligence will play a big role. How do you see Linux
Hmm.
on desktop? Because even if you create a platform which is okay with that, you don't have those capabilities which will come with Chrome OS or other platform. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I have two opinions
Mm-hmm.
on that. First of all is, as applications are moving more towards the cloud, a lot of that will be accessible through the browser on the desktop. So in that case, all platforms will be able to take advantage of those features. And of course, we intend to support that as much as we can. My second point is that I don't believe open source is at a complete disadvantage in that regard. It might be a little slower to adapt to these new trends, and but in the same way, I think open source developers and companies have a vested interest in developing open source projects, they might have. Sorry, I'm just thinking as I talk along. But As
I
as
understand what you're saying. Can I make it a bit simpler
Yeah.
for you also? First of all, when you say
Okay.
open source, I don't see there is one open source. There are different communities, right? Like there is
Yeah.
Kubernetes open source community. There's OpenStack open source community. There's desktop Linux open source community, right? So I do see, and no offenses, but I don't see a lot of innovation comes from open source because open source is not a product creation model. Open source is software development model. You get you
Yeah.
get people together to, so you cannot randomly get 10 people in the city. Hey, you know what, okay, you come from there, you come from there, we'll find something and we'll work together. No, the way open source work is that 10 people saw something. Hey, you know what, Amazon has AWS cloud, where people can access public cloud. Let's work together and create an open source alternative of AWS so that we can have more control over what we are doing. That's how I think open source work. Open source, you just randomly don't go and, you understand what I say, what I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Google created, so all these technology are actually created, when there is already a group of people, working somewhere, they create it, and then someone else, either open sources it or create, an open source replacement of it. That's how open source work. People don't kind of understand, but that's, I think, how it works. You'll never see a random people, running to where, you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
when I look at machine learning and all those things, okay, Google has open source TensorFlow, Amazon has open source, Elon Musk is working on open sourcing a lot of AI related thing, and Microsoft has open sourced, but they are just, the base technology. That's not the actual, um, that's when you inject your own algorithm, you learn from it, that is your data, what Microsoft or Google learn from
Yeah.
it. So when you say open source community, so I don't understand really what open source, but I think maybe you mean the desktop communities are not yet actively working on it, like GNOME communities, or the KD community, or any. So does that make sense? Is that what you meant when you said that, these when you say open source?
Yeah. I guess you read my mind
Oh,
right there. Yeah. But looking at the landscape, there are a few projects in development. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
I am
Mycroft.
very well. I know Ryan Sipes very
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Very cool. I know that they are a company that are venture backed, so they have a good business case for themselves while also creating an open source alternative to, Siri and Google Assistant. Um, it's very exciting to see how the project unfolds, and although the progress isn't as fast as it would be, say,
Yeah.
in Google or Apple, I think as the competitive advantage of it grows and the usefulness of such a tool grows, um, you'd see more contributors coming in and supporting the platform. For example, I know one of the more recent funding rounds they got is from Jaguar Land Rover. So to see that their project is being supported by such a large company, and I also presume that Jaguar Land Rover, will be using their product in their own cars. I see that as a way to boost open source projects into being a mainstream alternative to, say, the Google and Amazon and Microsoft's
Right.
artificial intelligence
Right.
platforms.
Right.
So essentially, as the business case for open source projects become more evident, that's when I see more innovation and more competition coming out of open source compared to the
Exactly.
proprietary alternatives.
That's how it has always worked, and the good thing is,
Hmm.
it's all people don't understand, but it's only when the companies or corporations get involved. I mean, Linux is hugely successful because companies are using it, and there's nothing evil with that. We if there is no economy around us, we will still be hunters and gatherers, killing each other to steal food. So this is the fabric of human civilization. So if your technology become part of it, you have higher chances of survival, versus if you're just working for non-commercial reasons. Now, one thing that I mean, I get digress, but since you understand all these things, it's interesting to just talk to you. One problem that is happening with AI is that I mean, everything is nowadays software defined. AT&T is building their future network, which is software defined. They just run white boxes. Everything is virtualized. Everything is software defined. The whole network. When we look at AI, when I look at AI, I think that is getting tied too much with the platform. Like Siri is totally tied to Apple ecosystem. Google's AI totally locked to their Pixel buds. So even if you have a third party, platform, it will not work. So I think it makes more sense to I mean, Google will be kind of, it's already not open sourcing, but they have public API, so you can plug into their AI, so you can, the Bose is working on their speakers which work with Google Assistant. So what I feel that is that Linux communities should work towards kind of taking advantage of that. And yes, it's also important to create alternative, but at the same time, I think it's more practical to also bake in support for Google Assistant within Linux distributions or desktop environment, just the way you have baked in Google Drive support. So what is your opinion about that?
Yeah, I think that's it's certainly a very good idea, especially as the usefulness of such assistance grows. At the moment, it's kind of a tool that is a little more of an extension of the computing experience. It's not exactly baked in perfectly into what you're doing. It's more of an assistant,
Right.
really. One of the ways that we would really like to develop such an artificial intelligence into the system itself is actually being able to control the desktop, control what you're doing from those voice commands. So if you want to, create a new document, you'd be able to write it purely by voice if it's more convenient for yourself. On top of supporting features for asking your assistant to schedule meetings by voice. So essentially, what we would like to develop the desktop into is something that is integrated really well with those assistants and vice versa. Um, as Google Assistant and similar assistants like Alexa open up their APIs more and more, it could be a very good opportunity to bake that support into Zorin OS, as well as being able to provide the tools to do that for other distributions. So it really is, the motivation to make that happen is really driven by how well those AIs develop and how useful they can become on the desktop. At the moment, our focus is on purely making Zorin OS more attractive for enterprise users, and by supporting everything that the IT administrators tell us. That's how we'd want to grow our business and grow our resources to actually be able to implement such a vision of the desktop with AI built in. So that's kind of our roadmap.
Yeah, I think what's really funny is that I never spoke to you before, but everything that you're saying is kind of not only makes perfect sense, but that's where I think Linux desktop should go. That's the only way it can succeed if you really want to have year of desktop Linux ever. To be practical and to see the real problems and try to solve those problems. Instead of kind of chasing a pipe dream, that nobody knows how to kind of really achieve. Is there anything else that is interesting that we should have talked? We have talked about a lot of interesting things, but something that I missed and you want to talk about, or do you want to just quickly talk about the base of Zorin OS, or do you think we have covered the main broad topics?
What are the interesting topics that I haven't talked to you about, and actually I haven't talked to a lot of people about yet because it's a bit far in our
Mm-hmm.
roadmap, is actually we'd want to focus on emerging
Mm-hmm.
markets. So essentially, there are 5 billion people out there who don't have a computer. Not simply just because they're too expensive for them, but also because they're not that useful for them. One of the projects that we want to be working on over the next 18 to 24 months is actually creating the computing platform for the developing world. Um, so making a desktop distribution that works on super affordable hardware that is powered by smartphone components, so ARM processors, that can bring the price of computing down to sub 75, even sub $50 devices. But even more importantly than that, um, most modern computers are pretty useless without an internet connection. And in the developing world, limited connections are pretty much the best that most people would have access to. So by actually preloading the most important parts of the internet onto the computer itself and offering it as a product that um, is available to so many more people, I think could be really attractive. So if the computer could include tools to help people work and run their businesses better, but also lots of educational content. So Khan Academy and Wikipedia preloaded, as well as all of the educational apps in the Linux ecosystem to teach a whole school curriculum, essentially, like maths, science, geography, even coding. Um, I think that such a product could not only be very successful, but also make a big difference in places where the internet isn't very commonplace. Because when we started Zorin OS, as an example, like I was 12 and my brother was 14. So we have no formal training in programming or software development or Linux in general. We learned everything from the internet. And a lot of people don't realize how much content and how much um, of an educational resource the internet is, but by actually packaging it into a product that's accessible to a whole new class of people, I think could be really beneficial. So we want to work on that as our long-term mission.
Have you heard of Endless OS?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We're actually pretty inspired by what they've been doing. We're big fans of everything that they've been doing, and we really support their vision, and we want to be essentially a part of that story because there's so many people out there who could benefit from
Right.
such a computing product, but of course a single company can't be the only ones who provide it to those billions of people. And what we want to do is um, to be in that market and to enter into new countries that they might not be able to focus on themselves, and try different ideas that might be counter to their strategy, and see how we could grow computers out to new classes of people.
Right, right. Though Microsoft will disagree with you that one company cannot, because monopoly is their kind of core. Because Michael Hall, he used to be with Canonical. He joined Endless OS, so I
Mhm.
interviewed him a few weeks ago, I guess. So they are doing some interesting things there. Uh, uh, so have you the best thing with you is that you are based out of Europe. I don't know what is the Ireland's situation in in terms of Brexit. Northern Ireland, or which part of Ireland are you from? You're from Ireland, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm from Ireland, so Dublin, the capital
Uh-huh,
city.
okay. Yeah, so I don't know what will, but the thing is that, because I lived in, Germany and then Belgium.
Mhm.
So Europe is very well connected to, the whole African continent and, whole Asian, and those are the two places where you do see a problem with, connectivity and, computing. So you are very well kind of connected with that place. So you can easily solve that problem physically, from logistic point of view also.
Mhm.
But since you said it's kind of on your roadmap, so I don't think I can talk much about it right now, right? Or because there,
Mhm.
but whenever something kind of you see something concrete is happening, just we can talk about it again, so that you can see how you can actually, because the hardware will play a big role. You have to work with the network providers because they are the one who will be offering connectivity. So there will be a lot of
Mhm.
kind of other moving parts, not just distribution. So once you have kind of and less is a very good example, how you can get it done either way. Anything else that you think we should have talked about? I mean, we can talk about base of Zorin, but I think a lot of people already know that it's based on so do you
Mhm.
want to talk about that, or should we just leave it on this high level kind of overview?
I mean, I could talk a little bit about the base, but kind of keeping succinctly with our higher level
Right.
overview. So we do get comments from our users saying like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, it would be cool if you made Debian or an Arch-based version of Sonos rather than Ubuntu." Um, but since our strategy lies in making the Linux desktop a lot more available and frictionless as a computing experience goes, and so that all of the apps are supported, as much of the hardware and software is supported. We chose the Ubuntu base not only because it was designed to be user friendly, but also because it's a very popular system. It's probably the most popular desktop in the Linux environment. And so by being able to take advantage of all of the progress that they've made in making Linux popular and supporting the software and hardware, we're able to essentially stand on on their shoulders and reach for the stars. So that's how we approach our strategy for our base system. So being able to provide a really frictionless experience is one of the main core tenets of our operating system.
Everything that you're doing there is like kind of fantastic, and enterprise is something that where I kind of focus on. There should be some sustainability, there should be some business model around it, and you should be trying to solve real problems instead of just trying to do for the sake of doing it. So I think you are doing a great, and I'm like, I kind of feel bad that I had never tried Zorin before. I did run it in a VM before, but I never tried it. But now this is a distribution I'll talk a lot about, because of that is one area that I really care about, because in 1 or 2 days I'll be doing a kind of a video also, that what is the actual market for Linux and what desktop should actually focus on. And I think you have actually set the whole stage for that. So once again, thanks for taking your time to talk to me today. And I'm really happy that there is somebody who understands where Linux should actually be heading if you really want to succeed on desktop. And good job there. And thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, bye bye.
It was really
Yeah, it
enjoyable.
was, and my
Thank
second
you.
bye.